Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
The BBC's China editor has resigned from her role in protest against the gender pay gap at the corporation. Carrie Gracie, who's been at the BBC for over 30 years and will stay on in a newsroom role, has written an open letter accusing the BBC of having a secretive and illegal pay culture. In July last year, the BBC revealed salaries of all employees earning more than £150,000 a year. Miss Gracie said she was shocked to discover the BBC's two male international editors earned more than 50% more than its female counterparts. US editor John Sopel earns between £200,000 and £250,000 a year, while Middle East editor Jeremy Bowen earns between £150,000 and £200,000 a year. Both Gracie and the BBC's Europe editor Katja Adler were not featured on the list, signalling they earned less than £150,000. And we spoke to Carrie Gracie earlier today.
It is not about more money. I have never asked for more money. In fact, I don't think in 30 years at the BBC that I've asked for more money, and nor have I on this occasion. In the 6 months since we heard the pay disclosures in July, I have been trying to say to my bosses, equal pay is very, very important to me. It's not about giving me a pay rise. It's about equality between men and women. And I thought I'd secured that when I went out to China. It was only in July that I discovered that I hadn't. So I've been trying to put it right. And I've come to the conclusion at this point that internal processes have failed.
Well, Sky's Lorna Shattuck joins us from outside Broadcasting House in central London. So has she been getting a lot of support from inside the corporation?
She certainly has, at least, not least from fellow female journalists within the BBC, 130 of whom have released a statement from a group calling themselves BBC Women, saying it was regrettable that Carrie Gracie felt she had to take this action in order to make this point, but backing her up completely and saying, in fact, they know of around 200 other women who've also had pay disputes or pay complaints with the corporation. But she also says, Carrie Gracie also said there is a crisis of trust within the BBC itself and what she called a bunker mentality amongst management, and that is why she felt that she was making very little headway on this issue. The BBC, however, has come back at that. They have released a statement saying that there is no systemic discrimination within the corporation. That was according to, they say, an independent audit done by a judge last year, and they say that in fact, compared to many other companies within the UK, they actually perform very well. Nonetheless, they are undertaking another report into on-air pay, the results of which will be made public in very soon, they say, in the not too distant future. Also worth saying that the BBC has confirmed to the Press Association it has reminded its staff today of its existing editorial guidelines, which say that those who have publicly expressed a view on an issue can't then conduct interviews on that issue. And that is why when Carrie Gracie appeared on Woman's Hour, a BBC programme earlier on this morning, she was interviewed not by the normal host of that programme, Jane Garvey, but instead by a Guardian journalist.
Lorna Shattuck, outside New Broadcasting House, thank you very much indeed. Well, joining me now from central London is Åsa Nystrom, the director of the Swedish social media company Buffer, which has a transparent pay structure for its staff. Åsa, thanks very much indeed for joining us. So first of all, here is your 30 seconds to pitch the company. What does Buffer do?
Oh, great, thanks. So Buffer is actually a US company. It was founded by a man from the UK called Joe Gascoigne. We do social media sharing and analyzing your data. So basically you can buffer your post throughout the week. So it's a tool that's great for marketing companies and social media agencies and many other types of companies that want to have a presence online and social media.
Good pitch there, also. Thank you very much indeed. So let's talk about what your company actually does in terms of being transparent on pay. How so? Is it on a website? Can we all access it, see how much you all earn over at Buffer?
Yeah, so it's transparent. We have both a transparent salary formula that sort of removes all bias from salaries, and it's online, a formula that can help you calculate what you would actually earn if you were working at Buffer, and it's found on our website, on our blog as well.
But how do you work out these figures? Because you can't always compare like with like, can you? Some people may be hugely experienced and maybe a man, and then a woman may come in to do the same job but may not have 10 to 20 years of similar experience. So would they still be expected to get the same remuneration? Yeah,
so you do start with the same salary formula that is based on, you know, the role that you're in, a benchmark out of that role in San Francisco, and also the experience somewhat is of course included in that. But we do pay equal for men and women.
And did you start off like this, or was there a moment where you thought, actually, we've got to be more transparent, and so therefore you brought in this new system? Because I imagine that would be quite difficult to do.
Yeah, so we brought it in 3 years after the company was founded, which was almost a year after I joined. So it was a conversation that we had as a group. We were still quite small group of people working at Buffer at that time. It was, you know, it's part of our culture, transparency. So we made a joint decision to have our salaries transparent.
So when you hear about the issues over at the BBC, I mean, are you surprised? Do you think that this is a problem, not just in broadcasting or tech, but throughout business in general?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a problem all across the world at all various different companies, and you know, we all can try and make it you know, a better workplace for everyone. But yeah, I do think it's a widespread issue.
Åsa Nyström from the Swedish social media company Buffer, thank you very much indeed.
Thanks so much.
The BBC's China editor, Carrie Gracie, has stepped down from the role because of what she's called an indefensible pay gap between men and women at the BBC. In an open letter addressed to licence fee payers, Carrie Gracie, who is remaining at the BBC, accused the corporation of breaking equality law. But the BBC says an independent audit of rank-and-file staff found no systemic discrimination against women. Here's our media editor, Amol Rajan.
Chinese once called Chairman Mao the great helmsman.
Carrie Gracie is one of the most respected international editors of her generation. For more than 30 years, she has broadcast about other people, but this time, she is the centre of the story. Ms. Gracie resigned from her position as China editor because she is paid less than men who are also international editors.
Morning, Carrie.
This morning, she presented the Today programme on Radio 4.
It's been very moving, actually.
The news of her resignation leaked out online last night. 6 months after the BBC was forced to reveal the salaries of some highly paid on-air staff, Ms. Gracie has been infuriated by the response to her grievance. She was offered a pay rise of £45,000, but declined it, saying equality is what she wants. She wouldn't be drawn on whether she wanted male colleagues to take a pay cut.
When I started the China job, I said I will only do this job if I'm paid equally. And in July 2017, I discovered the enormous gap that the two men who were international editors were earning 50% more, at least, than the two women who were international editors.
The BBC has completed 2 of the 3 pay audits it announced last year and found no evidence of discrimination. The final one will report in a matter of weeks. The corporation declined to put anyone up for an interview, but in a statement they said, "Fairness in pay is vital." A significant number of organisations have now published their gender pay figures, showing that we are performing considerably better than many and are well below the national average.
The BBC talks about a gender pay gap, but what I'm talking about is not a gender pay gap where sometimes men and women are in different roles which explain the differences in pay. What I'm talking about is pay discrimination, which is when men are paid more for doing the same job or a job of equal value. Now that is illegal.
There is tremendous anger among many female staff at all levels of this corporation. Senior figures at the BBC say they take this issue very, very seriously, but many employees have found the process of fighting for equal pay completely unbearable. The salience of this story, however, arises from its implications beyond this place, because it's happening in a climate in which many women across several industries say that they have suffered injustice and inequality for far too long.
Equality legislation doesn't work. We need to make it work. We make it work by forcing companies to be honest, which is still not happening, and by forcing companies to examine their hiring, promotion and parental leave policies.
Equal pay for equal work is a legal requirement. But who decides what equal work is? Ultimately, it's usually the employer.
This is what makes tackling gender pay issues so difficult, because obviously we want people to be treated equally and given equal opportunities in the workplace, but employers also need to have the capacity to offer people flexible payments, so bonuses and that kind of thing, to reward and incentivise people to do well in their job and to work hard.
The BBC's public ownership and obligations means it has to set unique standards and face unique scrutiny. With 200 formal complaints in train and the possibility of legal action, this story will run and run. Amal Rajan, BBC News.
Now, not just reading the headlines, but making them too. One of the BBC's leading journalists has resigned her post as China editor, saying she couldn't knowingly collude in what she considered unlawful pay discrimination. Carrie Gracie's very public stand over pay inequality has won the support of many colleagues who said they knew of up to 200 women at the BBC who'd made pay complaints too. We'll hear from Carrie Gracie in a moment, but first, Jane Death reports.
There's no point in me trying to do anything without my friend from the propaganda department, because we're obviously joined at the hip today.
Carrie Gracie went to China for the BBC, thinking she was being paid the same as the corporation's male international editors, only to find out years later they were on half as much again. She was offered a pay rise, but not the same pay as the men. So she's quitting China and will go back to the London newsroom.
Men and women are doing the same work, or work of equal value, and men are being paid more. It's just not acceptable.
Carrie Gracie wrote an open letter accusing the BBC of a secretive and illegal pay culture hours before presenting its flagship Today programme, alongside the corporation's highest paid news presenter, John Humphreys.
I would not wish to be remembered forever as the woman who complained about money. You know, I want to be remembered.
Too late.
I want to be remembered as the person who did some fine China work.
She is a China specialist, fluent in Mandarin. She was paid well, but paid less than Middle East editor Jeremy Bowen and North America editor John Sopel. Last summer, more than 40 female stars in similar situations demanded change, led by Woman's Hour presenter Jane Garvey.
It would certainly seem that there's some deep unfairness in the system. This whole business has been about equal pay. It's not about the gender pay gap. It's not about fair pay. It's not about pay being revised. It's about the simple truth that equal pay appears to be a problem for the BBC.
Journalist Mariella Frostrup has been campaigning for gender equality at the BBC and beyond.
This is an argument about equal pay, equal rights for equal work. And, you know, as long as we try and minimize it and say, oh, yes, well, you know, in terms of celebrity, it's very difficult to judge who should earn what, then actually I think we're not taking the situation itself as seriously as we should be.
Jennifer Millins is representing a dozen BBC women with, she says, compelling cases, while warning an equal pay claim is not straightforward.
You don't go to an employment tribunal and present, this is my salary, this is his salary, and that's the end of it, you've won. If you have an individual who is perceived to be particularly popular or who could attract big audience numbers, in certain situations that can be a valid reason for that individual being paid more. It's difficult to see how that's the case with newsreaders.
Carrie Gracie's stand has spawned a hashtag, I Stand With Carrie. Many high-profile women and men from the BBC have tweeted their support for the journalist. I've spoken to several of the BBC's female presenters today who would like to talk on camera, but they're nervous about speaking out because they're in the middle of formal complaints about pay too. And as one of them told me, we have little confidence in how the BBC would react. Today, the BBC said its gender pay gap is considerably smaller than in many organisations.
Fairness in pay is vital. We have already conducted an independent judge-led audit of pay for rank-and-file staff, which showed no systemic discrimination against women. A separate report for on-air staff will be published in the not-too-distant future.
The BBC isn't the only broadcaster under scrutiny. ITN, which makes this programme, is publishing its gender pay gap review soon. It said today it's committed to an equal and diverse workplace and is confident in its pay policy. But the BBC, according to Carrie Gracie, still denies there's a problem, and she's warning there'll be an exodus of female talent.
Well, earlier, Carrie Gracie left her shift at the BBC and came in here to talk about her decision. During our interview, she compared the pay of 2 male international editors with 2 women in similar roles. So I asked how she reacted when she discovered the pay disparity.
Do you know, at first I was so shocked. It didn't process up here. It was a kind of body blow. And then I slowly got angry, but in a kind of cold way. And on the August the 1st, I wrote a letter to the Director General, an email, saying, I will not wait to 2020 for you to sort out the gender pay gap, which is actually something quite different. Nor do I approve of the fact that you are complaining about having to make these revelations. And I will resign my post unless I'm paid equally.
But are you content to be working for a company that you have accused of acting illegally? I mean, shouldn't you just quit altogether?
I don't think so. I'm somebody who's worked for the BBC for 30 years. It's my work family. And when your family makes mistakes, you don't quit your family. You try and sort the mistakes out. I tried to sort the mistakes out in the quiet internal process way. It didn't work. That's why I'm now resigning and speaking out. But I still belong to that BBC family. I'm still proud to be a BBC journalist. I'm proud of our integrity as reporters. And I want to have at the BBC an equal, fair and transparent pay system. And I think, you know, it's the job of my generation to help fix it. If we don't fix it now, then our daughters will be having to fix it in 20 years from now.
It's quite a claim to make that the BBC is breaking the law. What evidence do you actually have for that?
Well, I've got the experience of my own case. I've talked to lawyers. I've been through repeated email exchanges, negotiations about my pay offer that they're making. The BBC say that the reason for the pay gap between me and my male counterparts is because of genuine material factors that make their jobs worth more than mine. But they haven't...
The North America editor, for example, is probably on screen more than you. Is that a justification that they could use?
Well, that is one of the justifications that they would try to use. But on the other hand, I speak Chinese. I've been reporting China for 30 years. The BBC repeatedly says I'm very hard to replace in China. And it's a very difficult job with lots of surveillance, police harassment, pollution, getting everybody from yak herders to Communist Party officials in front of a camera in a one-party state. That is not easy. And I do an enormous range of different outputs. So I don't know, but what I can tell you is that I no longer trust my bosses to give me an accurate answer. They assert that these factors account for the differences in pay, but they do not give me the benchmarks that I've asked for. If they gave me robust benchmarks and I said, OK, well, that's a persuasive argument, that would be different. I mean, I'm a sensible, fair human being, I like to think, but they haven't done that. And I suspect the reason why they don't come up with any answers on that is because there is no good answer that would actually stand up at tribunal.
Do you think, though, that it is quite hard to quantify what talent is? It's a sort of nebulous quality, isn't it? I mean, how do you... don't you just at the end of the day have to trust your bosses that they judge one person to be worth X and another person to be worth Y? I've
trusted my bosses for years. That's why I'm here. Because I trusted my bosses, and I now discover that they weren't paying me equally. Why would I trust them now?
I just want to read you a tweet that your BBC colleague Evan Davis put out this morning. He said, I don't think the idea that there should be equal pay for the same work makes sense in showbiz. No junior actor working alongside Tom Cruise should expect to get the same pay as him. I wouldn't have expected to get the same as John Humphreys when I joined the Today programme. Has he got a point?
No. I mean, I'm fond of Evan, but I don't really think that... I'm not in showbiz. I mean, I challenge anyone to come to China and trek around in a minibus, work all the hours of the night and you know, get jostled and thrown in a detention cell briefly by the Chinese police. But that is not showbiz. That is reporting.
There's been a lot of positive reaction on Twitter from broadcasters, viewers, MPs. Some people have said, though, that, you know, you're getting paid a very decent salary, £135,000.
Yes, I would agree.
You're privileged to do the job that you do.
I would agree.
So this isn't about asking for more money for you?
I don't want more money. The money is a problem. For me, the money is not the issue. The issue is the equality. The money gets in the way. I always had a problem about it would look in my own mind that I was asking for more money because I was asking for equality, but all I want is the equality. I'm very happy to be equal at my current salary or even a lower salary in the context of a restructuring of BBC pay, which attempts to create greater fairness for people on down the scale. I don't have a problem with being flexible about pay.
So that means the consequence of what you just said is that your male colleagues should take a pay cut.
Do you know, it's not...
is that fair on them?
It's not for me to judge. I don't have the information. I admire my male colleagues. I don't want to get into some mud fight with my male colleagues about how much, you know, different people should earn, how much different people are worth. That's not my job. It's the BBC's job to sort this out in a proper way.
What have been your boss's reaction to what you've done in the last 24 hours?
Well, they haven't told me.
No one's picked up the phone?
No one's picked up the phone, no.
Dropped you a text or an email?
So, actually, to be fair, one boss overnight just wanted to check I was OK for the Today programme.
No other comment than that? Just, are you OK to do your shift that you're scheduled to do?
Yeah, but I think that's fine. I mean, we're professionals. Just go and do the job.
You do have this incredible talent for speaking fluent Mandarin, which is really impressive. So I just wondered if you could just give your colleagues in China a message in Mandarin.
What would I say to my colleagues? Shang Ni Mila, which is just, I'll miss you.
Carrie Gracie, thank you very much.
Now, in case you thought the BBC gender pay controversy, which erupted last summer, has gone, it hasn't. It re-emerged last night with the resignation of Carrie Gracie as the BBC's China editor. It was one of those only at the BBC days because she resigned from that post on Sunday, then presented the Today programme on Radio 4 this morning. But the main effect of Carrie Gracie's move is to highlight just how hard the BBC is finding it to solve the problem that became evident last year.
Money makes the world go around, the world go around, the world go around.
It's ironic that EasyJet recently published its own pay gap, far bigger than the BBC's, but it has a clearer excuse.
6 expertly designed galleys and their equipment.
Yes, women employees earn 45% less than men, but that's mainly accounted for by the fact there are few women pilots and many women flight attendants.
There are 14 stewardesses to attend to the needs of the flying masses.
Flight attendants get paid less than pilots. Nothing illegal about that, as long as women pilots and women flight attendants get the same as their male counterparts.
When I started the China job, I said I will only do this job if I'm paid equally. And in July 2017, I discovered the enormous gap that the two men who were international editors were earning 50% more, at least, than the two women who were international editors.
But Carrie Gracie's scathing critique of the BBC is that she and many other women are getting less for the same job as men. Can the BBC defend that? Well, we did ask to speak to the BBC today, but nobody was available. In a statement, though, the organisation said that fairness in pay was vital and that the BBC was performing better than some other organisations. The BBC's conducted a judge-led audit of the pay of most of its staff and is now doing a separate review of on-air staff. Well, I'm joined now by Jennifer Millins, who's representing several of the women taking cases against the BBC, including Carrie Gracie. And also here's Sean Kevill, TV executive, used to be editor of Newsnight before going on to be director of BBC World News. Very good evening to you both. Jennifer, the review, is there an argument here? Look, the BBC is reviewing on-air talent pay. Just wait until that is out the way before doing anything. Is that a fair defence?
It's certainly going to feed into a number of the complaints and may give some answers to some of those complaints. It may just fuel the fire, though. We've seen with the equal pay audit that came out in October that very studiously set aside on-air talent as being a little bit too difficult to deal with, that actually those reports can in themselves lead to further questions about pay disparity. Certainly there was a lot made this morning by the BBC of the fact that there is no systematic discrimination at the BBC, as Sir Justice Elias said, Patrick Elias said in his report last October when he was looking at the BBC's equal pay audit, but he also said that that didn't rule out individual cases of discrimination.
Right. So systematic was the word, no systematic bias, but there may be, and particularly at the top end where...
Yeah, and that equal pay audit excluded on-air talent completely.
OK. Sian, I mean, when you were a manager, how difficult was it to kind of set pay in a way that you deemed to be fair, comparable, etc.?
It is a very tricky position on pay. You know, as a manager, I mean, when you're giving somebody a job, the first thing you have to do is they come in with a pay level. And that could have been determined by all sorts of factors way beyond your control. They may have been trying to be poached at one point. They may have gone into war zones which required a higher salary. They may have worked in an area where it was highly competitive. So you come in with somebody with a salary, and then you have to decide, you know, you're very unlikely to cut it. Equally, if somebody comes in with a very low pay salary, you may give them a huge increase,
but it's still not comparable.
Right. But you know, and you have a duty to try and defend the licence fee, and not just, you know, hand it out. You want to keep as much as you can to put on screen, as opposed to giving it to people.
Is a US editor the same job as a China editor? Because in a way, that's Carrie Gracie's argument, isn't it? These are two international editors, one's a man, one's a woman.
I think I was quite shocked when I heard about the disparity, you know, listening to the coverage today. And I think it is difficult when you have a job title which is the same. When you have a same job title, it does seem to denote that you have roughly the same sort of salary. And even Carrie wasn't, I think, asking for absolute equivalence. I mean, there could have been some disparity. It was the scale of the disparity. So are there differences between the two jobs? Well, there are, but it's very difficult, it's incredibly difficult to try and work out whether, you know, covering the manic stuff going on in the Trump White House is the same as dealing with you know, the repression of a Chinese regime.
Jennifer, you would agree that if the BBC created for some reason a Kazakhstan editor, it wouldn't be the same job as a US editor, presumably. So there are differences between these jobs, right? And is that accepted legally when you sit down and give legal advice as to whether you will get?
There's a whole melting pot of factors that go into whether there is equivalence, legal equivalence for men and women in their jobs and in pay, and that's why these claims are very difficult to bring, but they're also pretty difficult to defend as well. There's a complicated analysis, a fact-based analysis that takes place that really values the worth of the individual as compared to the worth of the male that they're comparing themselves against.
What is your advice to the BBC as to how to deal with this? Because they don't want to spend money. They've got an obligation to the licensed payer. Difficult to go to the men and say, we're pulling your salaries down, or maybe that's what they should do. And thus difficult to find all the money that women are claiming. I mean, just what is your advice to how to go about this?
There is an issue of the BBC not wanting to spend money and not wanting to spend more of licence fee payers' money. But this is an issue about pay. I mean, Carrie was very clear today that she did not want to be paid more, she wanted equality. But it does boil down to the issue of pay and how much people are paid. And the legal redress for these claims is to address that through pay, through implying a pay equality clause.
And back pay sometimes
and
as well.
back pay of up to 6 years.
6 years, that's going to be pretty expensive.
It could well be. It could well be. So, I mean, if I were advising the BBC, I'd say that they need to deal with individual complaints promptly, which is something that they've struggled to do so far, in a very genuine fashion. But also they need to look at their own data and not just quote their gender pay statistics, which is a slightly different issue and a different analysis, but to look at their statistics. They have all the data. The individuals do not have that data.
All right, I'm afraid we need to leave it there. Thank you both very much indeed.